One of the things that I thought was really important as we've gone through all this information is to go back and look at some of the topics of discussion and go, you know what, maybe I need to talk a little bit more about that particular topic, or maybe we didn't cover this point and obviously everything's shot, so at this point it's a little too late, or maybe not. So I went back in and put together what I call the top questions and answers so we can cover this and talk a little bit more in a little bit more detailed fashion some of these topics. Let's start with the very first one. Which one is better, a traditional IRA or a Roth IRA? Well, first let's talk, they're both ways to save retirement, but let's talk with what a traditional IRA is. A traditional IRA is where you save money into an individual retirement account. The money grows, you don't pay any taxes on it as it grows, and then at retirement you take the money out and you pay taxes on it. That's traditionally the way people have saved. Then comes the Roth. You put money into an IRA, a Roth IRA, the money goes in after tax, so you don't get a tax deduction for it. The money grows tax-free, and then at the end, you take the money out tax-free. You don't pay taxes on it. So let me ask you a question. If you had $1 million that you saved up in an IRA, would you rather be paying taxes on it in 20, 30 years, or would you rather have a tax-free income? I would suggest that a tax-free income greatly outweighs the small tax benefit that you're going to get on the front end. So if you have a good 8 to 10 years before you're going to need the money, I like the Roth IRA, and I think it's the superior way to invest money. And right now they have the regular 401k and the Roth 401k that a lot of employers are offering, and you can save in a Roth 401k as well. It's a great vehicle. Number two, how much should I save for retirement? You know, pop culture finance really focuses this discussion on how much you should save. Well, it depends. It depends on what you think you're going to earn on your money. And it depends on what your goals are. You see, to me, to get that answer, you don't just say, well, the standard savings is 10% or the standard savings is 15%. You have to go, okay, based on my goals, what percentage should I be saving? And this is where sitting down with an advisor makes a lot of sense to figure out, okay, this is the savings number. Am I comfortable with that? Can I do that? And this is the earnings number that I'm going to have to earn. And this is where I got to be at the end of each year that leads up to the goal of taking X amount of dollars out. So it's not really so much about what's the savings rate. It's more about what's the savings rate to help you get to your goals. What do you think about physical gold? As I was driving up here today, I had satellite radio on, and there's always gold commercials. There's always companies marketing and pitching gold as an investment. And they would even tell you that, and it's kind of scare tactics, which we've talked about in one of the teaching videos, but you got to take that for what it's worth. It's all marketing. I like physical gold, and I like having gold in a portfolio. I would prefer, though, to see it be a very small percentage. It's a good way to diversify. I don't like physical gold as much as I like investments that mimic physical gold. So if the price of gold goes up 5 or 10%, the investments that mimic the price of gold go up 5 to 10%. I prefer that because I think the fees are a lot lower getting into these investments, and they're also easier to sell and get your money out. So yes, I do like gold. No, I'm not a big advocate of saying put 20, 30, 40, 50% like these companies would love to see you do. You also got to remember they're making big commissions off of it. And I think it's got its place, but it's a small percentage just like any other prudent part of a portfolio. If I want to be conservative, are bonds a good investment? This is something that concerns me greatly, especially as we're shooting this in the environment that we're in. Just as a reminder, and I did a teaching course on this, when bond prices go down, interest rates go up. When interest rates go down, bond prices go up. There's an inverse relationship. Guess what's happening right now? The interest rates are going up, and they're projected to continue to go up because that's really where the only place they have to go is up. So that means bond prices are going to go down. But what most people think is that, oh, bonds are a safe, conservative place to be. You got to remember that we're a world full of debt. And if you lend money to a corporation or lend money to a county and they give you a bond, that's what you're doing. You're lending the money. Basically, you're giving them money and you're saying, you can borrow my money, pay me an interest rate. over a period of years, and then I want you to give me my money back. And as long as they don't default, that works. But there's a lot of very risky bonds out there, and I wouldn't be lulled to sleep that they're a very safe conservative investment. Bill Gross, who's considered one of the top bond, in fact they call him the bond king of Wall Street, manages a bond mutual fund, and this just happened a couple of weeks ago, and he has lost year to date 6% on what's supposed to be a conservatively based bond fund. In fact, in one day he lost 3%. Now, if you are a bond mutual fund investor, you're probably looking for conservative investments. That's not really too conservative, so you want to be careful. If I want to control risk, what are some strategies that I could use? Now, I go through this and I talk about them being Plan B strategies throughout the teaching courses, because I think it's extremely important to have a Plan A when the market goes up and a Plan B when the market goes down. What Pop Culture Finance will tell you is that, oh, you don't make any changes, you just stay invested, you're in it for the long haul. Well, I would disagree with that, because the market doesn't always go up. It goes down. And when it goes down, as in 2000 and 2002, if you were invested in the market, you lost probably over 50% of your investments. If you were invested in the financial crisis, you could have lost closer to 60% of your investments. Let that settle in for just a second. So do you think it makes sense to have a Plan B? And so what I would do is definitely go back to those teaching courses and look at the Plan B investing. In fact, there's a teaching course that talks just about Plan B investing, so that you can start to develop your own strategy for what you want to do when things get dicey. How big of a deal is it to manage expenses with your investments? Once again, this is Pop Culture Finance. And I want to take a global step back. Obviously, the more expenses that you pay, the less return you're going to get. It's very simple math. So if you pay high expenses over a period of time, you're going to get less return. But what are you paying expenses for? And that's the big question. And this is what Pop Culture Finance doesn't tell you. And I've gotten in, they're very passionate about this, because I've gotten into a debate. And here's the thing about debates with people, is that I don't have to be right. I'm just going to tell you what my opinion is. You can either accept that as being ludicrous, or you can accept that as, well, it makes sense. But I don't have to be right. I just know what I think is going to happen. Typically, you get people on this side of the expense argument is they're right. And here's the thing about money, and I've talked about this many times throughout the program, is that there's only one absolute truth when it comes to money. There are no absolute truths, because it's only opinion. Only you can go forward 2 or 3 years later and go, yeah, Bob was right about that. That was a truth. But I can't tell you what a truth is. So it all comes down to, what are you paying for? And a lot of times when it comes down to mutual funds that have higher expense ratios, you're paying for a risk prevention strategy. So in other words, let's take mutual fund A, mutual fund B. Mutual fund A has no risk prevention strategy in it, but you're paying really, really low low expenses. The financial crisis hits in 2008, you lose 50%. Versus a mutual fund that has a risk prevention strategy in it, and you are paying higher expenses, but you only lose 8%. Did it make sense to pay the extra 0.5% just to lose 8% versus 50%? And that's the key of the argument that I think makes faulty about just looking at everything from an expense level. But that's what Pop Culture Finance would have you fixate on. What is the biggest mistake that you see people making when planning for retirement? Really, it comes down to 2 things. Number 1, they don't plan. Number 2, they plan, but they don't follow through. Number 3, it's planning that's incomplete. As you'll learn, as I hope that you've learned as we've talked through, retirement planning has got several different metrics that you have and steps that you have to go through to really be successful. And then, even then, it's a management game. It's being flexible. It depends on whether you're in Plan A or Plan B, with the market risk. And there's a lot of things that go into it. Most people, and I can't tell you how many times I've put together a plan for someone, and then I'm sure that it went and got filed, and then we've never done anything else besides maybe mention it in the future. But you've got to follow the plan and actually be intentional about reaching your goals. Why don't you like buy and hold long-term investing? I think everybody's a long-term investor, But at the same time, I think it comes down to how do you define long-term investing? I define long-term investing as you're in it for the long term of managing for risk, investing the right way, and actively looking over your investments. Now, pop culture finance would have you believe you're a long-term investor, so the market goes up, the market goes down, but it always goes up. In fact, there was a Charles Schwab commercial that aired during the crisis, had this group of Charles Schwab investors, and they were all anxious about what was going on. He enters the room, and you think, well, here's a smart guy. He's going to really tell them, going to ease their concerns. And so they start asking all these questions about, what do I do about loss? And he says, the market literally says the market goes up, the market goes down, but it always goes up. I thought to myself, is that really all you have to make these people feel better? But that's what pop culture tells you. In fact, John Bogle, who I've interviewed on my radio show 2 or 3 times, he's a legend of Wall Street. He started Vanguard Mutual Fund Company in 1973, I believe. And he'll get on CNBC, and I have a lot of respect for him. I don't agree with him. I do have a lot of respect for him in his expertise and what he's built over a lifetime. But he'll tell you, don't pay attention to your statements. Don't pay attention to it's all noise. Don't worry about it. Everything will be okay. I don't know about you, but losing 55% of my retirement portfolio and depending on the long term to make it back up, a little bit problematic. What I don't like about long-term investing, about buy and hold, where you don't do anything, you don't manage for risk or anything, is that it becomes a habit. So you have this habit of watching the market go up, watching your investments go down, watch your money go up, watch it go down over a lifetime investing. So you've got locked into your brain, it always comes back. Well, maybe so, but what if you need it? What if you get to retirement like so many did in 2000, right before the bear market of 2000, 2002, where the stock market lost over 50%, and they retired? They went back to work because they lost 50% of their money because they're just assuming that things are going to come back. So it's a mentality that I don't like. It's a habit that I don't like that you develop over time, sticking to the buy and hold attitude. I think buy and hold works at periods of time. It's just not a solution to everything. What do you think about lifestyle funds or target date funds? This is where the 401k industry is gravitating towards, and I think it's a mistake. A lifetime fund is based on an investment that is geared towards your retirement date. So let's say that my retirement date was 2035. Then I would put my money in a 2035 fund. Technically, what's supposed to happen is as I age and get closer to my retirement date, then the fund takes less risk. On paper, it kind of makes sense. The problem that and that's one way to manage for risk. I can't fault people for doing that. I mean, that's one way. It's better than not having a way. But what ends up happening is that the closer you get to retirement, your risk level may be a whole lot different than the risk level of the money manager. And the money manager of that mutual fund may be taking, in fact, documented cases where they have taken a lot more risk and lost a lot of money. I'll give you a good case in point. Fidelity has these lifestyle funds or target date funds, and they had, this was back in 2008, so they had a 2009 target date fund. So if I'm in the 2009 fund, I'm not expecting to lose money, A. B, I'm expecting you to preserve my money going into retirement. Well, that fund, I'm going to be a little bit off on this, but that fund in 2008 lost 7 or 8%. To me, that's unacceptable. If you're that close to a year away from retirement and you're losing 7 to 8% of your investments because they didn't prepare for risk. So there's it's also risk levels based on pop culture finance. I would suggest that people in their 20s are a lot more risk averse than people that are my age. It's the darndest thing, but I think they've learned by watching their parents that, hey, it doesn't always make sense to take a ton of risk. So they respect risk, which is healthy, by the way, which is good to see. But yet, if you go into pop culture finance, they want you to load up on the risk. So getting into a target date fund that goes out 40%, goes out 30 years, because that's your retirement age because you're in your 20s, you're going to take 100% probably risk of the stock market that you may not be comfortable taking. So I think it's a flawed concept, but you're starting to see 401k plans, have been for a couple of years, gravitate towards those types of funds. Is investing in a 401k plan always the right move? I spent a lot of time talking about this on one of the teaching courses. I want to mention it again. No, it's not always the right move. But we're taught that that's what you do. You go to work for an employer, you put money into a 401k plan. Let me ask you a question though about that. At what point is this one account that you're basing all of your retirement on, wouldn't you want it to be the right type of an account? There's some horrible 401k plans out there that I wouldn't invest my money into. I especially would think twice if the company is not going to match or give you money for participating. So the only benefit to putting money into the 401k plan is a greater tax benefit, which I could argue does not outweigh the con of a bad 401k plan, or you have a limited number. You also could have a limited number of investments to invest your money into. So don't get sucked into the notion that, well, I got to invest into a 401k plan. There are other types of plans you can invest into that give you a more effective chance of making money. Do you prefer term insurance over permanent insurance? I think they both have their place. Permanent insurance is insurance for a lifetime. It builds up cash value. It's way more expensive. Term insurance is insurance that lasts for a period of time. Say 20 years, you're locked into a low premium. Then year 21, you're going to want to get rid of it because it jumped by 10, 15, 20 times. I believe that permanent insurance is more likely the choice for most people, especially young families, because they have a definite insurance need for a period of time, say 30 years, and they insure that. And the bigger question is, how much insurance do I need? How much can I afford? If you said to me, Bob, I need $1 million for the life insurance, and by the way, generally speaking, people need a way more than they think they need. But let's say that you need $1 million for the life insurance. And I said, well, for permanent insurance, it'll cost you $700 a month. But for term insurance, it'll cost you $100 a month. I would rather you spend the $100 a month and get the $1 million than some kind of a permanent policy, because at the end of the day, it's about protecting your family, not the argument between perm and terminate. Do I need a trust, or does a will by itself work? We talked about this, but I want to come back around, especially talk to young families who have kids. You know, this question comes to us by way of the nuclear option. What I term the nuclear option is what happens to your kids if both of you die? And you go, wow, it's a low probability. It's a probability. Do you want to leave that kind of risk to your kids? And so imagine a couple who does that. They have a will. They've got between life insurance, a home, 401k, they've got $1.5 million, and they've got a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old at home who have no parents. What do you think the chances of that money going to their best interest are when there's nothing to guide it? Now, that's a will, and a will is contestable and believe me, when wills are contestable, family members come out of the woodworks. I've seen it too many times. People die, surviving family members change. It's amazing when you introduce money into the equation, what it does to people. So a trust is different than that. A trust is you can set up rules inside the trust. If both parents were to die, everything goes into the trust. And then there's a trustee that says, I can only give money to the kids under these circumstances. So I know with our trust, and hopefully the boys will never watch this because they don't really know, but they won't see any money until they're like really, they would see money for college, but they wouldn't see a good chunk of money until they're 30, 40, and 50, because I don't want to ruin them by giving them a lot of money. So you can structure that however it makes the most sense for your comfort level. It's a way to control how your kids get taken care of when you're not around there to benefit them. Now, if you're older and you've got adult children, this makes a lot of sense too, because you leave no question mark as to what mom and dad wanted to have happen with this or that or this property or whatever. You spell it out in the trust, and the trust has to be liquidated and given, and property given out based on your terms as far as the person who set the trust up. How do I improve my credit score? We spent a lot of time on this, and want to touch base back with this and just pull out a couple points. The first one is you don't need a credit score and repair company to help you out. This is something you can do to yourself. It's not rocket science. They don't have the secret formula, believe it or not. It's one of those things that if you know what to do, and you will know what to do if you've watched the teaching video, then you can do it yourself. And nobody's going to care for that process more so than yourself. So it's really about going through and taking inventory of what's on your credit score and getting things that can be removed and knowing when you can get things removed. So it may be, things that you do as far as late pays. If you default on a credit card, those things stay on your credit report for a long time. But once that thing on your credit report has served its time, you can get it removed. And what these credit repair companies will have you believe is that you can have everything removed, which not only is not ethical, but it's not true. And so once again, if you go through that course, you can absolutely learn for yourself how to do it. I'm about to get married. What should we be doing financially to prepare? What's interesting to me is that the engagement period, a couple will go through counseling, and they'll talk about all these different things about getting married. And rarely do they talk about money. That's a topic that needs to be discussed. And, you want to have a good idea of how your potential partner is oriented towards money. What do they believe about money? What was their upbringing about in regards to money? Did they watch their parents rack up a lot of debt? Did they have the tendency to rack up a lot of debt? Are they a careless spender? What's on their credit report? I think it's a fair question. If you're getting married, let's look at each other's credit reports. And if you have someone you're engaged to that won't do it, that is a huge red flag. There's no reason in the world that you wouldn't show your credit report. But it's about setting up ahead of time during the engagement period where everything is lovely and happy. And then the real world starts when you get married. Not that you're not happy or anything like that. But it's the real world. There's different pressures and that sort of thing. And you want to establish ahead of time, and I talk about setting up values of what's your values together. And I will say this, that the millennial generation is doing a great job of this. I've counseled with many couples, and they're starting, the millennial generation and Generation Z are starting to turn the tide of financial irresponsibility, which study after study shows this. And people look at me like, are you serious? Absolutely. They're the greatest saving generation. They are probably the most educated. And I saw a study that came out and said they are better prepared for retirement than any other generation based on their age. Well, what should we be doing financially in preparation for our first child? I was having this discussion with somebody the other day, and he said, we didn't really figure out what it was going to be like once we had our first child. It was a big surprise. Financially, you got to know it's going to be a hit on the spending plan, right? So you really have to know the nuts and bolts of, okay, this is going to cost this much more, and be prepared for it. And if you have a spending plan, you have to know exactly, well, if we don't have the money available, what are we going to cut down on? Where are we going to pull from to pay those expenses? So what I would do is I would sit down with friends friends that you have that have had babies and say, okay, what are the costs? And get a real good idea of the financial impact of having your first child. Then, if you're going to have a second child, revisit that. What is the one thing I could do right now that would make the greatest impact on my finances? That would be the planning process. And when we talk about planning process, well, I'll show you this in a minute, that encompasses a lot of different things. But I think the very first thing that's important to do is, where are you spending your money? Track where you're spending your money. Get a spending plan together, which I talked through in depth, and that will make the biggest impact. And you attach values to that, it will have a huge impact on your finances. What are some of the key elements of the life insurance plan? What I find is that people they'll come to me and they'll go, I need $500,000 life insurance. And then I'll say, okay, well, what's the plan? I just need $500,000. That should cover it. I got to tell you, $500,000 worth of life insurance, although sounds like a lot, does not roughly even cover the bases. So you need to know, if you're leaving a spouse, if you were to die, what kind of income would you want that spouse to have? What kind of income do you have to replace? Do you want to pay off the mortgage? Do you want to provide for college? Do you want this to provide for retirement? Then figure out what that number is and go through the process of having a game plan. I think what's important is the ability to prepare your spouse for, hey, if something happens to me, this is what you do. Small percentage of America does that. There was one dear friend of mine who passed away. He was in his 50s, very unfortunate. And he had put in a notebook together, and it spelled out everything. All you had to do is go through the notebook, and you found everything that the spouse needed. There's one thing that a spouse who's going through the loss of another spouse doesn't need: financial stress. And this is so easy to fix. What makes up a financial plan? This may blow your mind a bit, but this is what, to me, makes up a financial plan. And the thing that can be intimidating about this, and I was meeting with somebody just this week and said, he was telling me that he went to a guy who calls himself a wealth manager, and all they wanted to talk about was retirement. And I just said, well, what season of life are you in? He goes, we're just trying to get our act together. And I said, great, well, let's talk about the spending plan. I mean, it's about where you are, and you start to pick and choose. Over a period of 3 to 5 years, though, you want to cover all these things, even down to one that I've added, identity theft. What's your identity theft plan? What are you doing to protect yourself against identity theft? The vast majority of America wrongly thinks that it's not going to happen to them. It's not if you become a victim of identity theft, it's when you become a victim of identity theft. It's going to happen. You just have to look at the statistics. The vast majority of people who are affected by a compromise of their personal information is unbelievable, the number of people, the hundreds of millions of people this happens to on an annual basis. Chances are it's going to happen to you, but you can have a plan together, and that's part of it. I am concerned I'm going to get laid off. What steps should I be taking? I always talk about the answer to this being, what's your shelf life? If something were to happen to you today, how long could you exist without running out of money? And that's what you need to know. So it comes down to figuring out, okay, if I got laid off, first of all, what would my plan B, spending plan be? What would I cut out? What would we go down to as a family in spending? That would be the first thing I would do. The second thing is figure out what your unemployment insurance looks like. The third thing is, am I going to get a part-time job and work part-time while I look for a job the other half to bring income in? What kind of income does my spouse bring in? Would my spouse go back to work? Figure out how much life that you have to make a career change. And this is one of the things you don't want to be doing in the midst of getting laid off. The emotions are high. You don't want to sit there and try to figure all this out. So this is why I think it makes sense, believe it or not, to have that plan B, to know, okay, if this happens, life changes, this is what we go into plan B mode, and this is what happens. Doing it in advance, I think, makes the most sense. Well, that's a few top questions and answers that some of it got covered, some of it didn't get covered. I thought it'd be worth either going through some of the detail or talking about some of these items. And if you have a question for me, believe it or not, especially if you're part of this Prudent Money Project, if you've invested into this, you can go to www.askbobbrooks.com. There's an Ask Bob section. You can send a question in. Yes, I do answer every single one of those questions that come in. I'm committed to doing that. And it's a great way for you to get information. Once again, www.askbobbrooks.com.